Fred Banks is a writer who has rented a secluded cabin to write his book in peace. He is trying to relax while Bettina, an aspiring writer herself, drives him to the place. Bettina talks to Fred about her stories, but Fred is simply apathetic. Bettina, however, can't stop talking about her story, and Fred, feeling rather annoyed by her babbling, enters the cabin and shuts the door behind him. Fred tries to begin writing his book, but fails miserably. That night, he fools around thinking that a creature is trying to get out of the basement, when a sudden slam makes him walk over to the entrance. The dire interior of the basement, however, makes him immediately close the door. The next day, Fred meets Fanny Addy, a straightforward and not too reserved young woman who so happens to be a horror novelist. Walking together towards her cabin, the two writers discuss their work. As it turns out, Fred hasn't really accomplished anything as a writer, whereas on the other hand, Fanny is the author of the best-selling horror book, Venus, a novel Fred has heard much about, but hasn't read yet. Envious, Fred looks her up on the internet when a power outage occurs. Fooling around once more, Fred is startled by Fanny, who appears at his window, asking him if his power is out. Fanny walks in and reveals her frustration from this blackout, just as she was beginning to gain momentum in writing her new book. She asks Fred if he was writing too, and Fred, shamelessly stealing Bettina's idea, says that he is working on a story about Cora and werewolves as well. Fanny asks Fred to explain his story about werewolves. Fred does so, but Fanny tells him that it is not a story, but more of an idea. Fred is a little upset by this comment, and a little contest of scaring one another begins. At this, Fanny suggests playing a game called Scare Me, where one is supposed to scare the other by telling a scary story. Fred is disinclined to follow, but eventually agrees to play along with her. Fred begins by narrating his werewolf story, but Fanny demands action from him if he intends to scare her. Fred complies and vividly performs a small act where a werewolf breaks into a family's house, killing the father and the mother and nearly the child, whose name is Sam, when the police arrive. Sam vows to avenge his family and turns into a bounty hunter, ultimately finding the werewolf and shooting him dead. Fanny alters Fred's story somewhat, changing the protagonist's gender from Sam to Samantha. Fred asks Fanny again about her new book, but Fanny says that she has signed an NDA and that her book is top secret. Instead, she tells Fred a scary story about a little girl and her creepy grandpa. Although too old and weak, Grandpa is closely monitoring his granddaughter as she plays around. The girl, Cassie, innocently sprays a lethal dose of Grandpa's medicine over his soup. At the last moment, Grandpa coughs and spills the soup on the floor, where his dog comes and eats it, ending up dead. This makes Grandpa sad, and as a result, much sicker. As Cassie stands by her grandpa's deathbed, she hears him whispering to her that he knows that she tried to kill him, and promises to return to torment her. Grandpa dies, and Cassie is inconsolable. Years later, while watching a VHS movie, she receives a call from her grandpa, who warns her that he is coming for her. Cassie hears squeaking noises from upstairs and arms herself with a knife. She goes to the stairs, and at the top, sees Grandpa's dead dog coming towards her. The door opens by itself, and the frightful dog walks out. Soon Cassie's mother walks in and sees her daughter, all white from terror. Fanny stops the story on a cliffhanger and says that she's hungry. She uses Fred's phone to order a pizza and unintentionally sees a text from Meredith, Fred's ex-wife. Fred asks for his phone back and snaps when Fanny doesn't give it to him right away. Fred then yells at Fanny and sends her outside. As Fred is talking with his ex, Fanny writes down some notes in her notebook. Fred startles her and speaks about his ex-wife, revealing that she cheated on him, and Fred sent her many letters threatening to kill her. He got better after that though, as he visited a therapist, but nevertheless his wife filed a restraining order. Fanny kind of overlooks all this and tells Fred that it is his turn to tell a new scary story. Fred asks Fanny to tell him about her acclaimed novel, Venus, but Fanny refuses. Fred, with Fanny's help, comes up with a new story about a troll living inside of an office building. The two writers act as if they are in the building, developing the story with dramatic quotes and powerful scenes. Fred is the troll, and Fanny is Karen, the lead protagonist of the story. Karen and the troll strike a deal where Karen is supposed to kill her boss in exchange for a kiss and 300 years of life from the troll. Karen gets alone with her boss and kills him while the troll is watching, but there's a witness. The troll screams that there should be no witnesses, and Fred and Fanny spoil the act by goofing around and laughing. As they sit down and talk to each other, they are both unaware of a strange figure entering the cabin that scares them out of their wits. But it's only the pizza delivery guy, Carlo. Fred pays him, and Carlo mentions that this is the perfect spot and time for killing someone. He jokes, of course, and acts as if he is a serial killer. Fanny is excited by his performance and asks him to join them on their game of Scare Me. Soon, Carlo learns that he is sitting with the famous author of Venus and a completely unknown writer. Carlo teases Fred and praises Fanny. Fanny appears to be mediocre before getting over her head and exalts herself. Carlo asks Fred to tell a scary story. Fred says about a high school ghoul, and Carlo makes a pun out of it, which Fanny writes down in her notebook. Fred objects, as it is not her idea, clearly showing signs of jealousy towards her. To calm things down, Fanny then proposes that the group use drugs. Fred says that he doesn't do drugs, but succumbs to temptation. Fred asks Fanny to perform her famous work, Venus. Fanny finally agrees and, with Carlo's help, begins narrating her story. Venus is about a young mother and her little boy going on vacations. Fred listens to the story, although dazed by the drug usage. In the end, Fred learns that the mother is some kind of a zombie vampire, but Fanny points to the symbolism behind this transformation of children clinging to their mothers. At this, Fred comments that his mother is no good, and Fanny disregards that remark in order to congratulate Carlo for his outstanding performance. Later, Fred suggests a new story about a girl named Beth who is possessed by the devil and wants to become a great singer in a talent show. Fred, Fanny, and Carlo act out the story. Beth sings, but the devil slowly comes out and everything ends in a gruesome fashion. After this performance, Carlo says that he has to attend the other deliveries. He thanks Fanny and Fred for the wonderful night, and Fanny signs him an autograph on one of the pizza boxes. Carlo leaves, and Fanny goes to the bathroom. Before leaving for her cabin, Fanny agrees to listen to one last story from Fred. Fred says it's about a killer and a woman who got under his skin. The woman is perfect, but the guy seems to be trying his hardest to achieve practically nothing. Fred actually makes a synopsis of his night with Fanny and ends up resenting her. Fanny living her dream while Fred is only being used. Fanny notices the fire poker in Fred's hand. It is revealed here that Fanny has written 10 pages about Fred in her notebook, showcasing him as a failure. Fred accuses Fanny of stealing ideas from others, but Fanny objects, saying that others steal from her. As the argument proceeds, Fanny demands her notebook back. Fred teases her before finally losing it and chasing her around. Fanny hides, and as she tries to escape, Fred hunts her and they both fall down the stairs. Fred accidentally impales himself on the poker and asks Fanny to finish him off for the story to have its proper ending. Fanny nods and grabs a log, but as she hums the tension music, like in the movies, she drops the log and walks away, leaving Fred all alone and helpless. In the morning, Bettina comes to check up on Fred, but fails to notice his dead body on the stairs. Instead, she finds Fanny's notebook. In a post-credit scene, Bettina is a renowned author, having succeeded with her new book, Scare Me, based on Fanny's notebook.